When I turned 18, my stepmom tried to hit me with a rent bill. She had no clue that I actually owned the house we were living in. I'd been living with my dad for as long as I could remember. My mom passed away when I was just a little kid, barely 4 years old. The house we lived in wasn't even my dad's, it had belonged to my grandparents, my mom's folks. After mom died, dad stayed single for a good long while. Sure, around the time I hit 12, he went on a few casual dates, coffee here, dinner there, but nothing serious. Whenever he went out, I'd usually hang back at home with a babysitter. None of those women ever set foot inside our house, and Dad never seemed all that jazzed about any of them anyway. But everything started shifting when I hit 16. By that point, my grandparents had both passed too, and it was just me and Dad rattling around in that big old house. That's right around when he met Ellen. "Lila, sweetheart, I want you to meet someone real special," Dad said one evening, giving me this nervous little smile I'd never seen on him before. That someone was Ellen. She was tall, dressed sharp, had perfectly styled blonde hair and nails that looked like they belonged in a magazine. But what really grabbed my attention were the two people standing just behind her, her kids. "These are my children," Ellen said, flashing this polished, practiced smile. "Owen is in his first year of college, and this is Chloe, she's 16. Owen barely even glanced up at me, too busy pounding away on his phone. Chloe though, oh, she definitely made eye contact. Later that day, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Look," she said, arms folded across her chest, "just because our parents are dating doesn't make us sisters or friends or anything like that. Let's just keep to ourselves, okay?" Things started moving real fast after that. 6 months later, Dad and Ellen tied the knot, and the whole lot of them moved into our house. It was crazy how that big, roomy house suddenly felt like it was shrinking. Owen took over the guest room, Chloe got the study, which we had to scramble to turn into a bedroom, and Ellen's stuff exploded everywhere, taking up every bit of space that used to be ours. Sharing a bathroom turned into an absolute nightmare. If Ellen wasn't locked in there doing her hour-long beauty routine, Chloe was hogging it for endless rounds of selfies. I started setting my alarm an hour earlier just so I could snag a quick shower before school. But I didn't complain. Not when I saw how Dad's face would light up the second Ellen walked into the room, or how he'd hum while flipping pancakes in the morning, or how he'd actually leave work on time just to have dinner with all of us. Dad was happy, really, truly happy for the first time since Mom died. Everything changed again when Dad landed a big promotion. One night he burst through the door, grinning from ear to ear, tie all loose and messy around his neck. "Regional sales director," he shouted over dinner. "Can you believe it?" Before the words were even out of his mouth, Ellen started rattling off ideas about buying a new car and ripping out the kitchen to renovate. But I couldn't get past the part where Dad said there'd be extensive travel. Turned out extensive meant he'd be gone for weeks, sometimes even a month at a stretch. The very first time he packed his bags and pulled out of the driveway, it was like Ellen flipped a switch. The minute his car disappeared down the street, she turned to me with this hard, cold look I didn't even recognize. "Lila," she said, her voice sharp and no nonsense, "we need to set some ground rules while your father's away." Those rules turned into a mile-long list of chores and curfews. I had to be home by 4:30 sharp, no excuses, not even for school clubs or study groups. "But I have volleyball practice on Thursdays," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm. "Then you'll have to quit," she shot back like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Somebody's got to help with dinner and keeping the house in order." Those first few days were brutal. I'd race home from school, barely dropping my bag before Ellen started barking out orders. "Mop the floors, Lila. Those windows look disgusting, Lila. Start chopping vegetables for dinner, Lila." Meanwhile, Chloe would be stretched out on the couch, giggling at her phone, lost in whatever her latest boyfriend had sent her. Owen was hardly ever around, but when he was, he'd leave a pile of dirty dishes in the sink and laundry scattered all over. One night, while I was elbow-deep in scrubbing pots and Chloe blasted TikToks at full volume, I finally spoke up. "Why doesn't Chloe have to help with any of this?" Ellen snapped her head up from her magazine so fast you'd think I'd thrown something at her. "Chloe needs to focus on getting ready for college," she said sharply. "She can't be wasting time scrubbing floors." "But she's just," I started, but Ellen cut me off with a glare that could freeze water. "She's just what?" she challenged. I glanced over at Chloe, who was now filming herself half-dancing in the kitchen, studying my foot. "Nothing," I muttered, turning back to the sink. But honestly, the worst part wasn't even the chores or the way she treated me. It was how Ellen could turn into a completely different person the second Dad called or came home. She'd slump into a chair, let out these big, exhausted sighs like she'd just run a marathon. "Oh honey, you have no idea how hard it's been," she'd moan when Dad walked through the door, managing everything all by myself. And Dad, sweet, clueless Dad, would kiss her on the forehead and hand her some fancy gift he bought on his trip, a designer bag, some expensive perfume, jewelry that looked like it cost more than everything I owned put together. "You're amazing, babe. We couldn't do this without you," he'd say while she beamed and showed off her new prize to Chloe. I'd just stand there, hands cracked from scrubbing floors, homework still waiting in my backpack, watching it all go down. Sometimes I'd catch Chloe smirking at me from behind her phone. But I never said anything. What was the point? Dad was happy. He was successful, in love, finally at peace. The years dragged on, and before I knew it, I was a senior in high school. Owen had graduated 2 years earlier, but he was still camped out in the house, claiming he was waiting for the right opportunity, which mostly meant lounging around gaming all day. Chloe was deep into her 3rd year at the local college, and somehow she was still the queen of the bathroom and still hadn't lifted a finger to help with anything. Then came my 18th birthday, early spring. I wasn't expecting much. Ellen had already made it clear she wasn't about to make a big fuss. "We'll just have a small family dinner," she said, barely glancing up from whatever she was scrolling on her phone. No reason to waste money on some big party. I tried not to think about how different it had been when Chloe turned 18 2 years earlier. That had been a whole different scene. Ellen went all out. She rented a fancy venue, hired a caterer, booked a DJ, and packed the place with close to 100 guests. She spent weeks obsessing over every little detail, making sure it was just perfect for Chloe's 18th. At least for my birthday dinner, Dad was home. He hugged me tight when he left the next morning, suitcase in hand, and said, "Sorry, princess. Duty calls. We'll celebrate for real when I get back." After that, I threw myself into prepping for graduation, college applications, ordering my cap and gown, the usual stuff you juggle senior year. Everything felt normal until that dinner about a week after Dad left. We were all sitting around the table, me, Ellen, Owen, and Chloe. I was poking at my peas, half listening to Chloe drone on about the latest drama with her boyfriend when Ellen cleared her throat. "Lila," she said, folding her hands neatly on the table like she was about to discuss something real important. I perked up a little, thinking maybe, finally, she wanted to talk about college plans. I'd been dodging the subject around her for a while, but hey, maybe she was ready to act like she cared. "Now that you're 18, she continued, her voice all fake sweet like syrup, "you're officially an adult. And adults have responsibilities." She paused, giving me this look that made my stomach tighten. "Starting next month, you'll be paying rent. I think $500 a month sounds reasonable." I just about choked on my food. Owen, ever the helpful big brother figure, smacked me on the back while laughing under his breath. I looked around the table. Owen and Chloe were both smirking, clearly loving every second of this. I forced myself to breathe steady and asked, "And what happens if I can't pay?" Ellen's smile widened too wide, like a shark smelling blood. "Well," she said sweetly, "then you'll have to find somewhere else to live. We can't have freeloaders under a roof, now can we?" I sat there, staring at my plate, my dinner stone cold, while her words just kept ringing in my head. The unfairness of it all hit me like a brick. All those years they treated me like the help while her kids lived like royalty. And now this. Something inside me, something that had been pushed down for years, finally broke loose. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice coming out way calmer than I felt. "Owen, who graduated 2 years ago and spends his days playing Xbox, doesn't have to pay rent. Chloe, who's in her 3rd year of college and hasn't lifted a single finger around here, also doesn't have to pay. But I do." Ellen didn't even blink. "I've made the decision that my children shouldn't have to worry about rent while they're getting their lives started," she said primly, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin like we were at some fancy brunch. And right then, a strange kind of calm settled over me. Maybe it was years of swallowing down my frustration, or maybe it was just finally time to stop playing nice. Either way, I felt a real smile stretch across my face, not the polite, keep the peace kind. A different smile. One that made Ellen's eyes flicker, just for a second. "Well, that's interesting," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because I won't be paying a dime. This house belongs to me." The room went dead silent. Owen let out a loud bark of laughter. Chloe giggled, high and sharp. Even Ellen chuckled, but there was a tightness to it, like she wasn't sure if this was actually a joke. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "This house is mine," I repeated, looking her dead in the eye. "My grandparents put it in my name before they passed away." The laughter dried up real quick. I watched as their faces shifted, amusement, confusion, disbelief, and then, finally, panic, at least on Ellen's part. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, snatching up her phone. "I'm calling your father." She tapped the screen furiously, put the call on speaker, and the ringing echoed around the kitchen. Dad picked up on the third ring. Hello? Mark, Ellen said, her voice tight and clipped. Lila's been telling us some interesting stories about the house. She claims it belongs to her. That's not true, right? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mark? Ellen pressed when he didn't answer right away. Dad cleared his throat. Actually, my in-laws did put the house in Lila's name before they passed, he said, his voice a little too quiet. Ellen's mouth dropped open like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You didn't think to tell me that? She practically screeched. How could you not mention something so important? I didn't think it mattered, Dad said, sounding about an inch tall. It never seemed relevant. Not relevant? Ellen's face was turning blotchy red now. Not relevant that your teenage daughter owns the house we live in. She hung up with a furious swipe of her finger, slamming her phone down onto the table. The kitchen fell into an awkward, buzzing silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Owen and Chloe just gawked at me like they were seeing me for the first time. Ellen sat there, breathing hard, trying to pull herself together. When she finally spoke, her voice was high and brittle like a bad actress trying to pretend everything was fine. Well, she said, forcing a fake little laugh, this has clearly been a huge misunderstanding. Of course you don't need to pay rent, Lila. She let out another strained laugh. Let's just pretend none of this ever happened, okay, sweetie? I didn't say a word. I just got up from the table and headed upstairs, leaving my untouched dinner behind. As I climbed the steps, I could hear them whispering fiercely downstairs, Ellen hissing, Owen and Chloe pitching their voices low but urgent. By 6 the next morning, I was already wide awake, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, feeling like my whole world had shifted overnight. Around 7, I heard someone moving around downstairs, the familiar clink of Ellen making her morning coffee. I was about to head down when I heard her voice, low and sharp, floating up from the living room. She was on the phone. Mark, you need to do something about this situation, she hissed. Your daughter can't just, we need to get her to leave. I froze mid-step, my heart hammering. I know it's technically her house, Mark, Ellen went on, her voice dripping with frustration. But she's causing problems. She doesn't belong here anymore. She's making everything harder. I could barely breathe as I strained to hear Dad's response. Even from the stairs, I could hear how uncertain he sounded. But Ellen, it is her house. I can't just kick her out. Nobody's saying anything about kicking her out, Ellen said, her voice shifting into that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. We just need to guide her in the right direction. What about those colleges she applied to? The ones out of state? You could encourage her to pick one of those. Tell her it'll be good for her independence. And then, the worst part. Dad's voice, hesitant but giving in. Maybe you're right, he said slowly. I'll talk to her about moving away for college. It might be better for everyone, Dad had said. I waited until I heard Ellen end her call before stepping into the kitchen, keeping my face completely blank. I went about getting a bowl and pouring myself some cereal, acting like I hadn't just overheard the whole gut-punch conversation. Owen and Chloe shuffled in after a few minutes, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else but there. Ellen breezed in last, her phone still clutched in one hand. Good morning, everyone, she chirped, her voice way too cheerful, like the night before had just never happened. We all sat down. The only sounds were the crunch of cereal and the soft clink of spoons hitting bowls. And then, just as casual as if I was talking about the weather, I said, "Oh, by the way, starting next month, you'll all need to start paying rent." Ellen froze, her piece of toast halfway to her mouth. Owen fumbled his phone and dropped it straight into his cereal bowl with a loud plop. Chloe's spoon clattered against her bowl like she'd just been electrocuted. "Excuse me?" Ellen's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Rent?" I said again, calmly taking another bite of my cereal. I'm thinking $500 a head sounds about right. Adults are supposed to pay their way, right? Ellen's face drained of color, then went bright red almost instantly. She coughed, choking a little on her coffee. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I said, not even looking up. But we're family," Ellen spluttered, her mask of control slipping. "Family doesn't charge family rent." "That's funny," I said, casually stirring my cereal. "Wasn't it just yesterday that you were telling me I had to pay rent?" Ellen's face burned. She set her coffee cup down a little too hard on the table with a sharp clack. That was different," she stammered. "I was trying to teach you about financial responsibility. Prepare you for the real world." I actually laughed at that. A real bitter laugh I didn't even try to hide. Financial literacy? The real world, I said, shaking my head. That's rich. Coming from someone who's been living rent-free in someone else's house for the past 4 years. Owen puffed up like he was about to say something tough, but I cut him off before he could even get a word out. No. You listen, I said, my voice steady and sharp. You graduated college 2 years ago. You don't have a job. You spend your days glued to a screen playing video games and eating food I helped pay for with my part-time job. Maybe it's time you learned a little about financial literacy too. I turned to Chloe. And you? When's the last time you even did your own laundry? How dare you? Ellen started, her voice rising, but I didn't let her finish. After everything you've done for this family? I asked, genuinely curious. What exactly is it you think you've done? Besides making me do all the housework while your kids lounged around? Trying to kick me out of my own house? Plotting with Dad this morning behind my back? Her eyes widened in shock. You were listening? She gasped. I heard everything, I said, pushing my soggy cereal away. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for some big changes around here. I leaned back in my chair and laid it out plain. Here's the deal. Either all of you start paying rent, or you find somewhere else to live. Ellen's face turned an alarming shade of purple-red. This is revenge, she hissed. You're just a spiteful, cruel child, jealous of my kids. Chloe scoffed loudly, finally chiming in. Rent? Are you serious? What are you gonna do, kick us out? You ungrateful little brat. Owen stood up so fast his chair toppled over behind him with a loud crash. After everything we did for you? After we welcomed you into our family? I stayed perfectly still, perfectly calm. This is my house, I said simply. My grandparents' house. You're the ones who moved in, not me. Ellen shoved her chair back, her hands shaking with rage. You'll regret this, she spat. You have no idea what you're doing. She stormed away from the table, calling over her shoulder. Owen, Chloe, pack your things. We're leaving. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening as they stomped up the stairs, slamming doors and dragging things around in a frenzy. Ellen paused at the front doorway, turning to glare at me one last time, her eyes full of venom. You'll pay for this, she hissed. Your father will hear about everything. And then she was gone, dragging Owen and Chloe behind her like angry luggage. The front door banged open and shut without even a glance back. The house fell silent in a way I hadn't heard in years. It was almost unsettling. I wandered from room to room, picking up random junk they'd left behind, setting chairs back in place, straightening pillows, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. It wasn't until late afternoon that my phone rang. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I braced myself and answered. Hello. What the hell do you think you're doing? Dad's voice exploded through the speaker so loud I had to yank the phone away from my ear. Ellen just called me, bawling her eyes out. How could you be so cruel? Something inside me finally snapped. All those years of biting my tongue, trying to keep the peace, pretending everything was fine, it all broke loose. Cruel. I cut him off, my voice sharp. That's funny, Dad. Where was all your concern about cruelty when your wife tried to charge me rent for living in my own house? Did that seem kind to you? There was a long, heavy pause on the line. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, weaker. What are you talking about? Ellen, never. Don't, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Don't you dare lie to me. I heard you this morning, Dad. I heard you agreeing with her when she said I should move out. Remember that little conversation you had? About how it'd be better for everyone. Silence. I could practically hear him squirming on the other end of the line. Lila, honey, you don't understand. He tried, but I wasn't having it. No. You don't get to gaslight me. He hesitated again, then his voice hardened. You're tearing this family apart, Lila. Is that what you want? He snapped. Ellen's threatening to leave me over this. Is that what you want? To destroy my marriage? I sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The couch still smelled faintly like Chloe's perfume. Photos lined the walls, mostly of Ellen's kids now. There was only one tiny picture of Mom left, shoved into a corner like an afterthought. When I spoke, my voice was clear. I'm not apologizing, Dad. Not for this. The line went dead. He hung up on me. Just like that. Graduation came and went in a blur after that. I barely remember walking across the stage. I just remember feeling lighter. Alone but free. The ceremony itself was beautiful, it really was, but the empty seats in the family section hit me harder than I expected. It felt like a heavy weight sitting right on my chest, a silent reminder of everything that had gone down. My best friend, Maya, and her parents were there though. They made sure to take a bunch of photos with me afterward, smiling and cheering like they were proud enough for both of us. They even invited me to their family's dinner celebration that night. They didn't mention the obvious, didn't bring up the fact that my family hadn't bothered to show. But their hugs lingered a little longer than usual, and that said everything without having to say anything at all. The next few days, I buried myself in college acceptance letters, trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. The house was weirdly empty, but also peaceful. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. That peace didn't last long, though. One afternoon, I heard the rumble of a familiar car pulling into the driveway. I peeked out the window and saw Dad climbing out first, followed by Ellen, Owen, and Chloe. They looked stiff and serious, like they were headed to a corporate board meeting, not coming to see family. All of them were dressed sharp, faces pulled into identical stern expressions. I beat them to the door before they could even knock. "Lila," Dad said, his voice weirdly formal. Ellen hovered right behind him, giving these little nods like he was a ventriloquist's dummy and she was yanking the strings. "We've come to resolve this situation," he announced. I leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing my arms, waiting to hear the rest. "I'm willing to forgive your recent behavior," Dad said carefully, picking every word like he was stepping through a minefield. "We can move back in and things can go back to normal. But first, you need to apologize to Ellen and her children for the way you treated them. And, of course, drop this ridiculous talk about rent." I looked at all of them one by one, Dad's tight, fake smile, Ellen's smug little smirk, Owen and Chloe both looking at me like I was something they'd scraped off their shoe. And all those years flashed back, the nights cleaning up after them, the lonely dinners, the way Dad had slowly turned into a stranger. "No," I said simply. Dad's mask cracked. His face twisted into something harsher. "Then you leave me no choice," he said, his voice rising. "If you can't be reasonable, if you won't be a part of this family, then I'm done. I'm disowning you. Is that what you want?" I felt strangely calm, like some part of me had already let go. "That's your choice, Dad," I said softly. "You've been making it for years. You chose her and her kids over me a long time ago." Ellen gasped like I'd slapped her. "How dare you, you ungrateful little witch," she hissed. "You've always been jealous of my children, always trying to come between us and your father." I pulled out my phone, real slow, like I had all the time in the world. "One more word," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "and I'm calling the police for harassment." "Your call." She shut up real quick after that. Dad didn't say anything. Just started gathering up the few things he'd left behind, moving around the house like a ghost. Nobody spoke as he boxed up his stuff, carried it to the car, made his final trip through the house where he'd once raised me. He didn't say goodbye. Neither did Ellen, Owen, or Chloe. They just climbed into the car and peeled out of the driveway, leaving nothing but tire tracks and a hollow kind of quiet behind them. That was 3 months ago. Now, I'm writing this from my dorm room at Northwestern University, over 1,000 miles away from that house and all the memories tied up inside it. I hired Bennett Real Estate to manage the property. They found great tenants, a young couple with 2 little girls who fill the place with laughter. The rental income covers my college expenses and leaves me enough breathing room so I don't have to stress about money. Every now and then, I hear little updates about Dad through mutual friends. Apparently, he's renting a 3-bedroom apartment across town. Still working at the same company, still flashing that shiny job title. Ellen finally got the renovations she always wanted. Not in my house, though. She's got her granite countertops and stainless steel appliances in somebody else's kitchen. Owen finally landed a job, but from what I hear, he's still living with Dad. And Chloe? She dropped out of college and started some fashion blog, whatever that means. They're living their lives, and I'm living mine. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I'll pull out old photos, ones from before Mom passed. Back when Dad's smile actually reached his eyes, and family meant something real. And I wonder if we'll ever find our way back to that again. I wonder if he ever misses me like I sometimes miss him. I wonder if he ever lies awake, thinking about the choices he made and the daughter he lost. Maybe someday he'll realize what he gave up. Maybe someday we'll fix what broke between us. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I know one thing for sure now. I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be.